Welcome to Your Future in Sales and Marketing, a podcast that helps you make great career decisions to get the most out of your career journey. We'll introduce you to the AXR network of established senior leaders and a handpicked group of future aspiring leaders who have it all in front of them. You'll learn what it's like in the top job and how to get there. Your hosts from AXR's specialist sales and marketing recruitment team will also land bonus episodes for you on how to work with recruiters, write a resume, and smash an interview, as well as our very popular market updates. It's the podcast that has it all. You can't get this career advice anywhere else.
Welcome, everyone, to Your Future in Sales and Marketing. My name is Mike Dixon, Director of the AXR Sales and Marketing Practice. We're joined in the studio today by Donna Oakley-Davies, General Manager of Marketing and Customer for Foodco. Welcome to the pod, Donna. How are you?
Great, thank you. And it's been a long time coming, but I'm glad to be here.
Donna, we had a conversation a year ago about getting you on just about, I remember.
We did.
And busy diaries and busy lives, and we've got it done, which is excellent. So, in fact, the time this comes out is probably a year since we had the conversation, I reckon.
Probably, yes.
Anyway, good to have you on. We're going to jump into our usual opening questions, everyone's favourite, which is a brand that you love the most, Donna, but you can pick one you've worked on before.
This was difficult initially for me because there's a brand that I've wanted to talk about for as long as you've been running the podcast, but now I've worked for them. So I might touch on them a bit later, but I won't.
I know
you know which one I'm talking about. But there's a theme that's similar with that brand, and the brand that I'm going to talk to, and it's probably a theme through my career, is Aldi. And the reason why I think is they're a challenger brand. I love challenger brands. I guess I started my career working for number one brands, and then I've shifted more into challenger brands. And what I find is they're hungry, they generally are more risk-taking and prepared to push the boundaries a little bit. And I think, Aldi coming into Australia amongst two big competitors was bold. And they needed to make sure they had a very clear strategy. And I think they've done some things really well. Obviously, at the very beginning, their centre aisle special buys is really, I think, what people knew them for and how I first encountered them. And I think that was really smart at bringing foot traffic in. But then they've done a really good job of building out, obviously, a more limited range of products, predominantly all private label. But whilst I hated this when I was in FMCG, they have done a very good job of making them look very similar to the big brands. So people have built trust over time with them. I think they also are very good at being on trend and thinking about local. So whether they're bringing something local that's more Australian tastes, working with local manufacturers, but they always seem to have, whether it's in that centre aisle or, believe it or not, they've got pistachio in their stores at the moment, for example, pistachio chocolate, they're always on trend. And then from a marketing perspective, I think for me, when I really started to notice them was in 2020 when they launched their flying banana ad. Don't know if you'll remember that.
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
And it was in a very humorous way to break down that misconception that everything they do is imported. And actually they have a lot of local Aussie produce. And I think that really, really cut through and was humorous fun. And then lastly, they were great to work with when I was in FMCG. They were a really good retailer to work with and operated very well and efficiently with you. So I'd say them. I don't know if any of your previous guests have spoken about Aldi, but they're definitely a firm favourite of mine at the moment.
Someone asked me this week, are you doing a montage of all the favourite brand answers? And I thought we must do that.
Yeah.
Actually put them all together. It rings a bell. Did someone do Aldi? I'm not sure. I think you could be the first.
Okay.
Just launched their own grocery range, Aldi branded products this week for the first time.
Actually branded Aldi because they have their own brands, but they're not under Aldi. Interesting. That's an interesting move.
Just come out. Yeah.
Interesting move.
It is. Next question. Where did you grow up? Tell us about life before the career started.
So you can probably tell, for those who've listening already, that I'm from the UK. I'm not Australian. I grew up in a very small village in the southwest of the UK in a county called Wiltshire. And to be honest, I lived very closely to, for those that may know, a little town called Westbury, famous for its white horse painted on the hill. And I'll be honest, quite a simple life. I spent a lot of time in the outdoors, surrounded by kind of fields. And most of my childhood probably was spent either out running with my neighbours' dogs or out picking bluebells or doing sport and exercise. I've got one older sister. My parents were not from the corporate world. So my dad was a cabinet maker by trade and my mum was a secretary. And I think this will be maybe a theme that we touch on a bit later. But my dad was someone who could turn his hand at anything. So whilst he was trained in cabinet making, he would build renovations, build houses, but he also did a stint in the ambulance service. So I think, my dad could literally do anything and everything. And but very practical. He's very, very practical. I had no concept of what corporate world was, because that's not the world that I guess they were in. And if I'm honest, I probably just thought I would work in Tesco, which is equivalent of Coles or Woolies here, on the checkouts. I didn't really know any different. I think what changed that for me was in my secondary school. So I'm not sure what that is in Australia, but high school. I went to private school, and I think the people I was mixing with, as a mentor of mine often refers to, you become the sum of the 5 people you spend most time around. I think, there was different expectations, different aspirations, and there was an expectation that you went to university from private school. So that, I think, started then the journey to going to university, which then led to my career. But I'd say kind of humble upbringing, really.
Fantastic. Yeah, I didn't know all of that. That's really interesting, Donna. Thank you for sharing.
You're welcome.
And your career, when it started after uni, was in the most British of institutions with Marks and Spencer. What did you choose that? How did that happen?
So it was actually while I was still at university. So I didn't know what I wanted to do. So I'm not one of these people who knew straight away at school what they want to do. To be honest, I think I wanted to play for England in hockey. I played every sport while I was at uni, or potentially be a vet. The subjects I loved at uni was home economics. I loved geography, I loved maths, but was very into, I think, food and nutrition. And so I went to Bournemouth University and studied a food management degree. And it was everything from nutrition, microbiology, food science, even some time working in a training restaurant as a chef, through to marketing, business studies, etc. And it was a 4-year degree where a year was spent in industry. And it was that year in industry where I was very fortunate to work for Marks and Spencer's. I'll be honest and say I was very scared. I'd probably even say the word scared, not intimidated, but scared. It was going to work in London in the big smoke, as well as I remember starting work and going for the interviews there. And there were all these women wearing their parasuits. And I'm like, who am I? This, little girl from the West Country. But it was such an amazing training ground. I was what they called a food selector. So I'd say it was probably a combination of product development, marketing and buyer, for those familiar with the kind of FMCG world. And was really, as I said, a kind of great training ground for me. And I had a really good mentor there. I think, breathed life and confidence into me that I didn't necessarily have at that age, and really shaped, the direction I then went after I then finished uni.
Great. Okay. And you've had obviously we'll get to your current role in Foodco, really interesting QSR business, but a lot of your career is FMCG, Donna. And how did that kind of move to, or this, I guess, just step into FMCG?
Yeah. It was absolutely inspired by my time at Marks and Spencer's. Yeah. So after university, I applied for numerous graduate training programs. They were either in kind of retail, your equivalent of Coles and Woolies, or Boots the Chemist, you'll be very familiar with too, or there were FMCG companies. I think, I obviously was interested in retail for Marks and Spencer's, but I spent so much time collaborating with manufacturers of FMCG companies, and I wanted to see maybe the other side of the fence as well. And I think I had a particular passion for product development and innovation at the time, and that happened at the FMCG manufacturers that then came to Marks and Spencer's. And so it was accidental, deliberate. I'll be honest and say it was probably more driven. And again, this is a theme that I'm sure we'll touch on. I was very fortunate to get offered numerous different graduate training programs, but it was actually the culture of the business and the experience going through quite grueling recruitment processes, from, aptitude tests and case studies and centres where you were being interviewed along with 40 other candidates. And it was probably that experience and the culture that I felt through that made me choose United Biscuits, which is very similar to Arnott's for any Aussie listeners, as my first foray into FMCG.
Brilliant. And moved into marketing and became a brand marketer. And that's been a central functional, I guess, component of your career. But I want to touch on a really interesting role in your earliest career. You became the chief of staff at Heinz for the CEO, European CEO, which sounds an incredible role. Sounds like something out of television show almost. What was it? How did you get that? What were you doing?
Yeah, I mean, a role that it's not particularly familiar, I think, to a lot of people. So I'll talk a little bit about kind of what it was. So how it came about was, again, whether it's luck or, people say you create your own luck. I got to work on, in the marketing capacity, I got to work on the relaunch of Heinz salad cream, which at that time was over a 100-year iconic Australian brand that was really struggling. It was the biggest project that was being worked on in Heinz Europe. And my boss went on maternity leave 9 months before we were going to launch the baby of Heinz salad cream in a repositioning. And it was a major piece of repositioning. We put the price up 70%, complete full mix campaign. And because I then got pretty much to report directly into the CEO for quite a bit of that time, I got huge exposure, I guess, to senior management. That project was extremely successful, driving category and brand growth as well as profitability. I think the campaign won over 20 awards, and I am very fortunate, got highly commended in Young Marketeer of the Year award for, I can't remember if it was Marketing Week or one of the, the magazines back in those days. And I guess it was from that experience, the CEO noticed me and he approached me and said, would I like to do a secondment into what was, I think, the third iteration of a chief of staff role? To say I jumped at it would not be true. You'd think I would. But again, hugely intimidated to do that sort of role where I reported into the CEO and basically was mixing with the ELT equivalent at that stage. And I got to work on everything from my own kind of marketing projects. That was looking at things like the Heinz master brand that didn't sit within a category. I worked on the due diligence stage of 2 acquisitions. I launched Heinz into a brand new category of chilled sandwiches, which probably for a lot of listeners, they'll be like, what? Heinz chilled sandwiches? Through to then literally I would shadow pretty much him in whatever he did. So whether it was him going to meetings with the equivalent of someone like Vodafone or British Telecom when we were trying to do some promotion with a mobile phone company, whether it was him doing disciplinary meetings with his direct reports, to, going to board meetings, sitting in, the monthly ELT meeting. I just got huge exposure across the business as well as my own projects. And I would say, to be honest, it shaped me to who I am today in multiple ways, particularly that more broader total enterprise thinking that you and I talk about a lot. After that experience, you can't go back and just be a marketeer. Fully understood the P&L, why marketing budgets get cut, how you pull different levers on a P&L to drive business success. But also, I think probably one of the things that stayed with me, again, similar to my first boss at Marks and Spencer's, is Nigel was his name. He breathed confidence in me that I didn't necessarily have. He believed in me when I didn't. And that's something that I've taken through my career with any of my direct reports or people that I've mentored cross-functionally. And often I think what holds people back in their career is their own self-confidence. And so trying to breathe that into them when they don't have it themselves is probably one of the other things I took out of it.
Yeah, it's a wonderful thing. What an incredible role.
It was. It was.
From this girl from Wiltshire who was thinking about working on the tills at Tesco to sitting in on some of the most amazing meetings with the high-powered people. A great career accelerator for you, but I love the perspective you've given it as well around breathing confidence. I want to jump forward to Australia because we were chatting before we did a quick bite to eat, and like you, often Brits, including myself, move to another part of the world for a stint with a view to come back home. And I wonder if it's just to kind of give you a safety net in case you're not sure.
Possibly.
But here we are, 20 years later. I'm here, you're here. So,
yep.
And you've carved out an amazing career. Take us through the early days. What brought you here, and how did you land in Australia career-wise?
So I honestly, I'm sure a lot of people you speak to, it was purely to go travelling. Coming out of the role with the CEO, I was meant to go back into a more senior role within Heinz. And I kind of said, I'd like to take a year off. I didn't do that typical gap year between, going to uni or from uni to work, where a lot of people travel around Europe. I was like, maybe now's the perfect time to take a year off. So I wanted to travel through South America, New Zealand and Australia. So I found myself in Australia. I bought a Holden Commodore station wagon called Jack.
Of course you did.
I drove 70,000 kilometres around Australia, pretty much every single side road you can imagine. So I have a lot of Aussies actually ask me for where they should go if they want to explore Australia. And I naively maybe thought Aussies went to work in their board shorts and were super chilled and it would be a really easy transition back to corporate world. So I thought, why not see if I can, get a job for 6-12 months. And by that stage, I'd fallen in love with Australia, but not necessarily Sydney, but I knew Sydney or Melbourne is where the roles were. So I thought, let me see if I can get a job for 6 or 12 months to experience living in Australia versus traveling it. And here we are 22 years later.
Excellent. And you worked for some pretty iconic businesses in the early days. From memory, Arnott's, Kellogg's, I think, was on your list as well. But I want to kind of just talk a bit about how one of the themes I've seen your career develop over years, Donna, but one of the themes I think is really interesting is how you gather experiences. So you start out as quite this classic path, and the chief of staff role, super different, a real big experience gathering role. And you could have jumped back on the classic marketing FMCG career path, but you started to it felt like it lit something in you, right? And I'm going to start gathering different experiences. Is that quite deliberate at the time? Is that kind of reflecting back as how it happened?
I think it's probably more about how it happened, but the attitude and mindset of saying yes to opportunities, looking for opportunities, but then when an opportunity presented itself, saying yes to it. So, to be honest, when I first came to Australia, I did the classic, and not just a classic marketing role. I went to Arnott's, which was pretty much a mirror of United Biscuits, where I started my career in the UK. So you could say quite safe and comfortable. Yeah. But, I think Arnott's is like a university in itself, into marketing, into business, amazing training back, 22 years ago. And that was very much kind of your classic marketing role. But I think after that, I spent about 3 years at Arnott's, and then I got some, I guess, feedback, guidance around if I was going to build a career in Australia, I probably need to go work for some global businesses. And whilst you could say, places like Heinz are global, up until that point, I'd been responsible from strategy through to execution. Whereas a lot of companies in Australia, they're global businesses, and Australia is a small part of those businesses where you adapt and adopt a lot of what happens globally. And so I got some guidance around maybe getting some non-food experience, diversify my portfolio experience, but also go work in a big global. So I chose Colgate-Palmolive, to be honest, driven by the culture. And I worked on the personal care Palmolive side of the business. And again, I went into a classic marketing role as a marketing manager on the body cleansing portfolio. So shower gels, bar soaps, things like that. But an opportunity came up probably about a year or so into me being there, where it was pretty much a new role for the organisation, shopper marketing. This is 2007. So shopper marketing, what's that? Probably the only FMCG business that was doing that was P&G. And I think Colgate wanted to step into this, foray into this. And Australia was one of 6 countries that got chosen to kind of pilot it. And I had a conversation with the marketing director, and he's like, were you interested? I said, absolutely. Don't really know what it is, but it sounds interesting. And again, it was a role initially where I went from, I think I had a team of about 4 in my previous role. It was just me, which a lot of people wouldn't necessarily have done. But I wanted to, I guess, get broader skill set and interest. I'm someone who loves to constantly learn and grow. And I think what that role really consisted of was category strategy, which is more category function traditionally these days, but so learning really about the category. It had the component of shopper marketing campaigns. And also there was a lot of training and embedding thinking and processes across the organisation, which again, in hindsight, really appealed to me because I love personal development and kind of that learning space. And again, I think, that really reiterated that broader business thinking where, rightly or wrongly, was probably the first time I really learned with them. What's in it for them? But not just, people often maybe just think about the company, what's in it for the consumer, what's in it for the shopper, what's in it for the retailer, and what's in it for the manufacturer, and thinking broader in everything we were doing and really unlocking how you grow brands and category. So that was, I guess, my first kind of step into
something different.
Yeah. But still, I don't know, wasn't it so far away from marketing? I didn't go into finance or something. Yeah. But got that broader commercial understanding.
And I'll fast forward now to your time at SC Johnson, because that was when you started to operate at executive leadership levels, and that was your first ELT role. Describe that transition, because I'm always interested in that step for people, particularly to our listeners who are looking at you and your role and thinking, how do you get there? What's the difference between those roles and moving to an ELT level?
Yeah. And again, another interesting, I guess I went there initially in a marketing capacity, but then got promoted to category director. And again, I remember at the time going, oh my God, I've never been a category manager, or like, how do I do that? And I got reminded by my general manager that we're not putting you there, Donna, for your functional expertise. It's your leadership expertise. And how do you get the best out of the people that are the functional experts? And I think that's a key to transitioning to that ELT, is it's not just about your functional expertise anymore. And they're probably some of the things that I remember. I mean, again, when I first stepped into that executive leadership team, I felt nervous. I was with people that were very experienced functional experts. Not only was it my first ELT role, but it was my first role in category as well. So 2 things that were, I guess, new to me. Yeah. And I think the key when you're stepping into a role like that is, 1, listen and learn. Have the humility to not pretend you know everything, because I think that builds trust and authentic relationships. But also, I remember Terry, who was the GM at the time, saying to me, when you come into the boardroom or into the ELT meetings, you actually leave your functional hat at the door. Here is where I learned about 1-2 thinking, where it's actually think business first, and your executive team is your key team, then your functional team, which until then it was all about defending marketing or category, whichever function you were in, and trying to win that argument. And I think probably the other one to some degree is fake it till you make it as well. So yes, there's an element of being authentic and don't pretend you know stuff when you don't, but participating in conversations, asking when you don't know what something means, or show that hunger and curiosity to learn when you step into a new role, position, and onto the ELT.
Yeah, I think that's really important, that fake as you make it. It sounds quite glib, but it's actually important because it prevents people saying yes and having a go often.
Yes, it does.
And the reality is no one's truly 100% ready for a role. Everyone's faking it to some extent. So don't feel you have to be ready before you jump into something new.
And, and possibly leaning back onto even the chief of staff role we were talking about. I didn't have a clue what I was going to be doing then, what the role was, well, alone did I have the ability to do it. It was probably a little bit the same, when you first step into an ELT, you don't know what happens when this exec team go to a room and have these meetings when you're, lower in the organisation. And then, sure, I had some idea of what some of those things would be, but then you get to really understand they aren't just working in the day-to-day in the business, they're working on the business. And it wasn't just the strategy and things, it was, and particularly at the time at SC Johnson, we were trying to go through a big cultural change. So a massive part of that role was around how do we drive cultural change and drive engagement, which again, right up my wheelhouse as far as something I'm really passionate in, but also realize everyone around that table started somewhere and they're human beings. And I think if you can connect on that human level and not think it's all about the job, which I would say at the beginning of my career possibly even held me back. I was very task focused, trying to prove myself that I was good at the job functionally. You actually realize at least half of it is building relationships, networking across the organization and having human connections with your peers and across and below the organization.
I think mentality and development is a big theme of your career, Donna, and adaptability. A lot of people look at somebody who reaches the LT and says, "I think, gosh, it's plain sailing from there on in." But life doesn't work out that way, and every career is full of things that go wrong. And you're not expected. Roles get restructured, promotions don't happen, businesses get sold, things that are out of your control. And in this perfect pathway, it's not a perfect pathway for anybody. How do you cope when these things happen? And maybe use a couple of examples of where you've had to cope.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny. I think for some people, like I've come across some people who spent 21 years at Unilever and I'm like, how did that happen when I've worked in, 21 companies, not quite, but certainly had my fair share of twists and turns. Some of those great. For example, who would have ever thought I would have got the chief of staff role? Maybe, going into shopper or into category director role. But I've also had a lot that haven't necessarily wouldn't be perceived as positive. And I remember my first one when I got made redundant. It shook me to my core. I was in a big global and I thought I was set for life and I loved the company. And then, the GFC hits and, it's business is business. And I think, from that time on and maybe even reflecting back to seeing my dad being able to turn his hand to anything, which to be honest, I only got that insight through thinking about this podcast actually and reflecting on my childhood. I think I learned to adapt and have a backup plan, not necessarily always consciously at the beginning. So, I think so much of it from those setbacks, you build resilience, you build a tougher mindset. And a lot of that has been not just through own personal experience, but I've had a real passion for personal development. So I'm not saying any of your listeners should do this, but I went and got my master prac in neuro-linguistic programming, became a results coach. I'm a trainer for the Anthony Robbins company because I'm really personally passionate about how do you always, grow and excel and get excellence in that mindset perspective. So that has definitely seen me through the tough times. But then I think it has been that gathering of different experiences and saying yes. So I left SC Johnson actually to go pursue initially my own business. And it was to do exec coaching. I thought something completely different. I'll be honest, I got a bit disheartened with corporate at the time and some changes. And I thought, I've always wanted to maybe lean more into this development space. And I loved it. And I loved the kind of the people development side of things and coaching people. But I then found myself also doing some consulting back in the marketing category space. And I quickly realized I love corporate, even though sometimes I felt a bit of a square peg in a round hole. Fundamentally, I love business. And I realized that this passion for people development mentorship I can do within an organization and still have the commercial corporate side of things. And so I think it's been a mixture of that mindset, the growth mindset, the resilience, that interest in personal development. And then I think a big shift for me has been the realization around it's less about achievement, it's more about fulfillment. And so I pursued things that would fulfill me versus it being about achievement, which is what the start of my career, to be honest, was all about.
Great. I think that's quite an important lesson because you've done some things in your career around experience gathering, taking roles. I place you in roles where they don't make logical sense in terms of a career trajectory, but they've interested you. You've taken a senior brand manager role, yet you've been a CMO.
Yeah.
You've done things and unlocked experiences that others either won't do or struggle to do. I'm just wondering, how is it you approach that, and how do you kind of find yourself processing that and then leaning into something that's quite different and off the beaten path?
Great question. Might get quite deep here, maybe. I don't know. I think there's been a couple of things. I think, I'm really passionate about business and brands and building brands. I love what I do. And so there's been times where maybe I've not been in a role, and I'll maybe talk about one. I found myself during COVID looking for a role, and I knew at the senior end of the market that was going to take some time, whether that was 3 months, 3 years, who knows. And an opportunity came up, as you said, it kind of more of a senior brand manager role. Literally, it was a project manager for 3 months with Edgewell. And I think I was actually technically reporting into a senior brand manager. And I was like, hell, why not? I get to still keep my hand in while I'm looking for a permanent role. I get to learn about a new industry, a new brand and a new category. But also, I believe you can learn from anybody. And again, I think that comes from my dad. He would talk to anybody. He was so humble. I remember, again, a mentor saying to me, Donna, whether it's a cleaner or it's a CEO, you can learn from people. And I learned a lot from the senior brand manager, and it filled gaps. There was times in my career where I moved really quickly, and I hadn't done some of the admin-y things or learned how to do SKU Vantage or whatever it might be. And I was like, actually, this is an opportunity to fill some of those gaps that then when I do step back into a CMO role, I'll be able to help some more junior people. And so, and then I suppose some of the experiences I'd had where who would have thought when I joined Heinz as a brand manager, I would have then done a chief of staff role. And that's how it played out with Edgewell. I came in for those initial 3 months, loved the business, and I then worked on another project leading the master brand relaunch for Chic men's razors. Then another opportunity came up, all still consulting with them, to launch a new brand into the Australian marketplace in a completely different category. And at the same time, through my networks, I started doing a initial 3 month consulting gig to Chobani, who was that company I want to talk about at the very beginning that I've always wanted to work for and were on my dream board. So how was I not going to say yes to a 3 month opportunity, which again, that led on to me actually working with them for 12 months on projects that I just never would have had exposure to had I not said yes. I helped them launch into China, taking the brand into New Zealand, got to work on their brand positioning and brand strategy and portfolio strategy, things that you would do as a CMO, but only came because I said yes at the beginning. And I think that's the biggest thing. It's say yes to something because you don't know where it's going to go and what's going to come from it. And there's been times where I've taken the safe route and the role's been made redundant in 6 months, or I've joined for some particular thing and then the boss has left and they completely restructure that position. So even sometimes when you think you're taking the obvious right next step, it doesn't turn out. And then there's been other times where I've done something completely left field and it's turned into amazing opportunities.
Brilliant. And this experience gathering has been great. I mean, you've had the chance to work at some really cool companies, where, big and small. We were marketing director at Mars, you got country manager at Bell and others, but you're now back on ELT again, which brings us up to speed. You're with Foodco, you're the GM of marketing and customer there. Talk about the step back into the LT again.
Well, surprise, it came through saying yes to a lower level role initially. So funnily enough, a lady who was in the role I'm in now prior, she actually worked for me in a previous role. She approached me and said, look, it's a 6 month contract role, kind of group marketing manager level. Are you interested? And I was like, absolutely. It's a new industry. Love to come in and see how I can help. And I think that's probably the other maybe mindset, is that I didn't always go, what's in it for me? I was, how can I help them, whether it's a team, whether it's the business. So that's how I ended up at Foodco. And I built relationships quite quickly there, was learning, had that hunger to learn a new industry. And it's probably only about 3 or 4 months into that role, the general manager of marketing and customer then decided to leave the organisation. And I happened to be at the right place at the right time. Yeah. Don't get me wrong, they put me through a very grueling interview process to get this role. But I potentially would have not even have been considered in the mix because I didn't have QSR experience.
If you weren't there.
Hadn't I not been there.
Great. So, and let's give some context, because Foodco isn't a business everyone knows. Yeah. They'll know the brands, right? So give me the Foodco elevator pitch, brands, mission, culture.
So again, most people won't know Foodco at all, but it's a leading player in food and coffee retail sector. It's got over or almost about 450 different outlets. We're a franchise business and across 7 different countries. I'd say, it's hard to know what to describe us because I don't necessarily say QSR, probably more informal eating out. Because I think the classic QSR is your big McDonald's, your KFCs. And in comparison to those players, to be honest, we're quite a small, humble player. We're very much around consistent, steady growth and, massive growth or ever thinking we're going to become a 1,000 outlets in kind of one country. But what you will hopefully know is our two main brands, which we double down on, which is Muffin Break and Jamaica Blue, both of which have been around over 30 years in Australia, but also, as I said, we're in 7 different countries. And that's really, 30 plus years of heritage and consumer trust in those two flagship brands. We have a vision to build brands that people love. And our mission really is to empower franchisees to run profitable businesses. We're very much here at service to our franchisees and obviously then the customers. You'll find us predominantly in shopping centres, but also in transit hubs, be that train stations, or we've recently opened both the Muffin Break and Jamaica Blue at Perth Airport. And you probably wouldn't know that Jamaica Blue is now the largest cafe chain within the hospital network within Australia.
Wow.
So I diversified, I guess, out of that, shopping centre portfolio post-COVID. How I would describe the culture is a really nice blend between a corporate and still the family warmth. We're a family business, and a phrase that Shabani used, we're growing up from a family business to kind of being a corporate. We have 4 values with an acronym of EPIC: excellence, passion, integrity, and camaraderie. And I think that really sums up how we do business, particularly the very supportive and collaborative nature. But to be honest, I found that about the industry. I found the QSR type industry very supportive, and we're all trying to lift each other up as an industry.
Great. And your role there, so we talked about you're the GM of marketing and customer. Give me an idea of the scope of that. What are you responsible for?
Yeah, so I same as a CMO type role within FMCG, I lead product, brand and marketing strategy, but it's also broader in that I look after everything from customer service, digital, loyalty program, through to even have influence on store design. So it's potentially a bit broader than that. I manage a diverse team from both backgrounds, but also, as I said, kind of across multiple different areas. So there's a huge part of that role that is mentoring and coaching, which, if you haven't picked up, is a bit of a passion of mine. Obviously, I'm on the executive leadership team, and the key role there is, again, I guess, shaping culture, business strategy, and the direction for the future. But what I would say, which is why I would say it's right up my alley, is this role really blends that kind of strategic leadership with hands-on execution. I think that's the thing about retail. It is quite hands-on, and I'm equally as comfortable, in a boardroom or on the cafe floor. And I think, and it's not just me, a lot of our ELT, we very much lead from the front. So, we'll listen to our franchisees. I'll be out with our franchisees, with our field teams, on the ground, staying close to our customers, but working side by side with our franchisees. So we've got a $3 muffin day coming up soon for Halloween, and there'll be loads of us across the business that are in stores working on the shop floor, helping them out, because it's obviously a very busy day when you're doing something like that.
Right. Sounds interesting. So similar to FMCG in some respects, but quite different as well. And for those who are thinking, actually, you know what, I'm in FMCG. I know this QSR is, you called it something different. You called it
informal eating out.
Informal eating out. And I think, well, I like the sound of that QSR or informal eating out industry. You made the transition. Can others make the transition? Is it?
Absolutely. I mean, I say absolutely. I think it depends a little bit on the individual, but there's so many shared fundamentals between, brand strategy, innovation, portfolio management. Yes, the scope is broader in QSR, as I said, store design, loyalty, but that's what makes it so exciting, because I've got more tools in my tool, literally all elements of the marketing mix, and I control whether our products do or don't go into the shops. I don't have to go through through a retailer. I think, there's obviously a lot of similarities. So the skills are absolutely transferable, but I think you have to have a growth mindset. You have to have curiosity and agility. And then absolutely you could take the step into QSR or vice versa. I think, core things that are consistent is that stakeholder-centric thinking. Think about your customers, your shoppers, whether it's your retailer or your franchisee and your business. So I personally think it's an easy transition. The hardest thing would be a company being open to someone from a different background.
Yeah. Which is often where we have challenges in recruitment, is opening people's eyes to the capability. But I want to move forward back into marketing and a bit of advice to others now, Donna.
Yeah.
Now, we've known each other a long time. We've seen a lot of evolution in marketing and business, your career. If we apply I'll call it the Netflix Black Mirror to the future or the near future, what do you think marketing might look like if we can leap forward 10 years?
God, it's a bit scary. So much, I think, will be technology that changes the game. I think some of the things that will absolutely stay the same will be human emotion will still drive engagement. And that's what I think great marketing does, is drive emotion and drives why people engage, whether that's, fear, desire, belonging, status. So I think those timeless triggers will still be there. I think brands will still sell aspiration and people aspiring to be whatever is being advertised. So I think those things will stay the same. I think what will be really different is I think it's going to be hyper personalized, even kind of neuro marketing where, real time, maybe it's a bit futuristic, but, there'll be real time emotional tracking. I could see a stage where you might be watching an ad and the ad might change and evolve depending on the emotions that is being fed back to the TV screen or the mobile phone or whatever we're watching it on. It might, adapt to your brain's response to what's going on. I think augmented reality will play a part. So whether, I think these things are probably already happening where you might walk past a shop window and depending on what it's picking up from you, the ad might change there or you'll see yourself wearing the clothes that, you're walking past. So I think technology is going to be, fundamental to it. And then I think one of the key things will then be how do we use, whether it's AI or, other technologies in a responsible way, which is I think what scares me a little bit at the moment. You don't know what's real or not real. So I could even see that, you're watching an ad that we won't be actually having consumers in those ads anymore. There'll be AI generated consumers. And I think that's the biggest opportunity and challenge facing our industry is how do you use that ethically and in a way that consumers are going to expect? Because I think if you don't evolve and use it, you're going to get left behind from what consumers are now expecting. But also is so much about building brands is trust in that brand that if you start abusing that at all, you'll lose consumers really quickly.
Yeah, it's super interesting. I was listening to James Cameron, the film director, on TV last night talking about the AI could replace actors and could easily do it right now, but he's fighting tooth and nail for not to happen.
Yeah, particularly when you think something like Avatar. I mean, that would have been perfect to have AI characters, right?
Completely. He's like, no, not going to happen on his watch, interestingly.
Yeah.
Okay, almost at the end now. So with that kind of future focus in mind, if you were to say, these are the three things to our listeners that you've got to kind of keep in mind and do today in order to keep developing and maintain your relevance for the future you described, what would it be?
I think the number one thing that comes to me, and at least the conversation we were having a little bit earlier, is think past the next quarter. I think, post-COVID, a lot of businesses have thought more, particularly in the retail space, have thought more about what's the next quarter, maybe the next 6 months. How do you keep looking ahead with a strategic kind of foresight and think beyond kind of the trends, but what are the ripple effects of those trends? If this did play out, what does that look like? And so I think, dedicating time aside to be thinking future, to be running kind of what if workshops with your team will be the number one. Number two, I think, is keep learning. I think that relentless curiosity, I can't remember who coined the saying, but, leaders are learners and not thinking you know it all and understanding how technology works. I'll be honest, I'm still learning a lot about AI, but you could either be scared for it or you embrace it and you learn about it. And I think particularly at more senior roles, you go, I've got teams that can do that. If for me to lead that team, I need to at least understand it. I don't need to know how it all works and the technology behind it, but to be that role model to foster that curiosity within your team. And then the last one I think I'll talk to, which links to what I said previously, is how do you lead with trust and those ethics in action? Sure, maybe power is cool, but trust is everything. And once that's broken, so I think just because you can do something doesn't mean you should. And I'll never forget one of the things I learned from Chobani was a saying they had is do the right thing, not the easy thing. And I think that's something that we need to be thinking about, particularly in this world of AI and checking yourself, but also what you're doing with the brands and the business. So, I think in summary, in a changing world that's changing faster than ever, leaders who stay relevant are going to be the ones not with the most answers, but the ones that keep asking the smartest questions because they keep learning and are curious and are thinking ahead.
Great summary. Okay, last question. Finally, back to you and your career. If we look forward again, what does your career look like?
Who knows? Based on my past history. I love my current role. I love being in retail. And I think there's so much exciting things are going to happen at Foucault. But I think, you've seen a theme. I'm really interested in total enterprise thinking. So whilst I get to do this on an ELT and think broader around the business, I could see a natural move for me would be into an MD or a general manager role where I am then more responsible for all aspects of a business. And then, potentially after that or go somewhere different, I'm really passionate about animals. And not that it would have to be an animal, but I would love to be on some boards, some animal charity boards or other boards is kind of non-exec roles. I don't see myself ever retiring. I think I would just get bored. And so I'll always want to keep my hand in something of some sort. And I think having as you said, what did you call it, kind of gathering of experience and skill set and network, whether it's doing a 6-month contract here at whatever level, something that can just keep me entertained and my brain challenged what I see myself doing, whether it is more formal or less formal.
Fantastic. Donna, thank you for telling us your story. I've known you for a long time and I've learned a lot today about
there
you, which is wonderful. Really, really authentic, interesting, enjoyable conversation. So thank you.
Thank you for finally having me on the podcast.
It took a while.
It's good to be here.
We got there. And thank you all, as always, for listening. If you're not connected to AXR, reach out to me or any of the AXR team to join our community and get access to our range of career assets from industry-leading salary guides. 2026 is coming out soon. It will be phenomenal. To a monthly report of who's moved where in the market, which is our most opened report. So from me, Mike Dixon of AXR Recruitment and Search, thank you for listening. We'll be back soon with more episodes and insights to help guide your future in sales and marketing.
We hope you enjoyed today's podcast from AXR Recruitment and Search. We're passionate about helping you get the most out of your sales and marketing career. Keep listening as we bring you more career insights and advice from Australia's inspiring sales and marketing leaders. See you next time on Your Future in Sales and Marketing.